Hi everyone. So I wanted to take you through an approach to doing a resiliency impact assessment from a point of view of sort of enterprise architecture and technology. So just sort of background on this, I was involved in coordinating an activity like this about 6 years ago. It wasn't in response to, I think, any sort of regulation, but it was in response to essentially an internal group audit point within this organisation. And I think just sort of growing concern from the FCA and various different regulators around how much dependency there were on systems and really whether people had properly thought about their resiliency, the resiliency of these systems and essentially the impact that they could have on, say, customers, possibly the economy. So I just want to take you through the process. I'm going to go through quite quick because I don't want this to be sort of too long-winded. It's sort of split up into a number of different stages. So we've got mobilize stage, analysis stage, test stage, and then really sort of sign off. But test is almost like sort of sign off anyway. So the way in which this worked for me, and I'm hoping it will work for you as well, because otherwise you've got quite a sort of big first step, is we had a business impact assessment, and what this activity had done was really agree within the business what the critical processes were. So that was fortunate for me because I didn't have to go through and lead a whole activity to work out what the critical processes were for the business. So first step, get your BIA critical processes. Now, second step, with this work, I'm really hoping you have a view in terms of your stakeholders, because otherwise you're just doing work randomly without any stakeholders. What I would suggest is confirm that you have access to all the required stakeholders with regards to these processes. So second step is agree what are the critical processes. In other words, the priority. Prioritize which critical processes you want to focus on, because if you go through every single one of your organization's business processes, critical processes, it's probably going to be a very, very big task. So second step is reconfirm stakeholders and prioritize which are the critical processes for the business. To give you some idea, I really honestly cannot remember how many processes were in the BIA list, but I think we got it down to about 15. So this was 15 processes that we were told, these are the core ones for business and they must be resilient. So they had sort of different requirements for resiliency, but these were the key processes. So you got your critical processes list, the sort of master list. You've confirmed your stakeholders, and you've got agreement with them that you've got a subset of those critical processes, and they are the key ones that have to be resilient for your business. So the next stage, with that list, you can understand who you need within your team, and we can go through the different activities, but essentially I went to solution architects within different areas, and they were the SMEs or knew the SMEs within the systems. And I mean, just to be specific, when I say solution architects within the organisation, and I know that the naming has changed for some roles, and better to be specific than sort of vague. Solution architects were the people who knew, from a business point of view, how the system worked. There are no stakeholders within the business. There are no the technology components within the platform, and they would be the ones that were included in change delivery. So they would usually, produce the architecture design document. They would 9 times out of 10 have come from more of an application background, but they would understand what infrastructure the applications were running on, and also have been involved probably in sort of like production support, post sort of delivery. So those are the guys or girls that I sort of called on, and they were the ones I needed for the team. And obviously I knew which areas to go to because we had the prioritised critical processes. So that's the sort of mobilise. What we then did was we did the analysis, and the analysis phase was awesome because it was sort of reminiscent of when I was a youngster doing system design. So I just cover off the deliverables first, the outputs really of these exercises. So this whole analysis phase, the end goal, and I'm sort of starting the end and working backwards because I think it makes more sense. The end goal was to produce a report, so a document, which had all the different components in, with their components that we used to sort of provide those processes, with detailed attribution against those components so you could understand whether they were resilient or not, what technologies they were on, all those sort of things. And also UML sequence diagrams that showed how the processes were realized across all those components. So what that did was it provided the sort of factual detail of these are all the components that are used for these processes, and it showed the workings of how we knew those components were used in realizing those processes. So that's really what the sequence diagrams did. So that was the output, the report. As you can imagine, on the way there, we had a spreadsheet, which was the list of critical processes. And within that spreadsheet, we had a tab for each of the critical business processes with the components that we used with attribution against them. That's the spreadsheet. And then with the UML models, we had, it's a bit specific, but we had essentially folders for each of the different processes. We had flows within each of those folders. And the sequence diagram showed the sort of behavioral aspects of these processes, so start to finish. And off the back of the sequence diagrams, we then had components which showed more the structural characteristics of those components. So if you imagine maybe a security component, identity access management component, IAM is there, and it's got surprise, login, authorize, etc. on that component, so you can see what the actual sort of structural characteristics of that component are. They were taken from a sequence diagram. So in terms of deliverables, an end report that stakeholders could read and sign off, which had detail of the UML diagrams and details of the tables, etc. from the spreadsheet. We had the UML model, which is also good in terms of any sort of future work. And we had the spreadsheet as well, so that's some master spreadsheet. So on that basis, step one, create your spreadsheet. With the critical processes. Plus the component lists. Now, at the moment, obviously component lists are blank. What we're saying with that is just that you've got a tab per business critical process. Step two. UML model, like I say, folders make sense, so just have folders per critical process, so work through it. UML model, with the realizations of the processes. Now the realizations, the way that we did this was we would have, you'd have an hour session with all the relevant SMEs on. In fact, we included everybody just in case, because you never know, it's always good to get sort of second pair of eyes, or maybe not second, other people looking in on the process. It also meant that they actually understood what was expected of them sort of in subsequent sessions. So we would walk through all of the different flows for a critical process. And with these flows, it isn't a one-to-one. So a business critical process, the sort of level that they were identified at would be something like customer buys product. Maybe customer buy products, bad example. Maybe it's customer takes money out of bank account. You can imagine that's important. You want to be able to get your money out, maybe you need to pay the bills, etc. So customer takes money out of bank account. That's one process. But the flows, you imagine the flows that would be there. So the flows, sort of sequence diagrams, so equate to sequence diagrams. The flows, customer takes money out of bank account. There we go, that's one. Maybe another flow. Customer tries to take money out of bank account, but insufficient funds. Another one, maybe customer checks balance prior to taking out money of bank account. You end up with a series of flows, like more than one flow per critical process. So it's important to be able to work through those. And if there are any exception ones, like the insufficient funds is an example, they're still critical off the back of that process, because if a customer is trying to take money out of their bank account and they have insufficient funds, but they're not told the reason is they have insufficient funds, it's really on you as a company, well, as a bank in this example, because you're not providing that critical process for a customer. And if you've got thousands or millions of customers, you can imagine it's going to get much, much worse. So what you do is you identify all the different flows for that critical process. Get on a call with everyone, and we used, I think it was WebEx, with the modeling tool open, and we said, okay, what are all the different steps within this process across all the different components? And we basically drew out a sequence diagram for each of the different calls, including things like authentication, including any of those sort of individual steps, because the whole idea with this is you don't want to leave something out just because, hey, everyone knows that. You need to make sure that every single component, every single step in the journey is resilient. So we do that, we go through the process. When we're doing these realizations, we had a spreadsheet. Again, it sounds like I love spreadsheets. Just sort of basic way of keeping lists, where we would list out any activities, any questions, any outstanding bits and pieces, and put owners against them. So, you've got your SMEs, you've got your solution architects there, but the reality situation is they're not going to know every single answer. But you do need to make sure you keep a list of all these different open outstanding items, and then you can just sort of basically chase them down. Once they're chased down, you can then either confirm that the sequence diagram is correct, or you can make an update and update the details there. So anyway, you got your sequence diagram, and like I say, it's got the actor, the customer or whatever. It's got all the different components, all the different platform components, services, whatever they are, and you have the different activities that are going on within those flows. The byproduct of those sequence diagrams is that you now have a view on all the components that are involved in the processes, which is where we get back to the component list within the spreadsheet. So within this, you take the components that have been identified, you put the name in the process, and then you fill in attribution against them. So okay. So within that, you have name and component, you have the technology it's on, you have whether it's highly available, where it's deployed, is it provided by a third party. You have loads of different attribution that you can use to assess whether it's resilient or not. Time to recover, fallback processes, etc. So you fill those in for each sequence diagram, and you can imagine, this isn't something that's just going to be, okay, we've done all the sequence diagrams, now do the spreadsheet. What you want to do is you want to run these in parallel, because you may find that you've got a component in maybe the first sequence diagram that appears, say, 12 times across other processes. So if you've got outstanding questions on those components, you really want to be resolving them as quickly as possible, so that you can then reuse those bits of information that you've learned to sort of go through and do the other sequence diagrams. So really this is an iterative process where you're going through, you're getting more and more information. And at the end of this, you have your UML model with the sequence diagrams, shows that you have proven you understand exactly how the different flows work for these critical processes. And you have a spreadsheet full of these different tabs with information about the components. Now, depending on the way the component is, it might be that you are sort of copy and pasting component details. But it might be that the component is a high-level system, maybe sort of black box system, where actually the behavior is slightly different for, say, one function versus another function, operation, service, etc. So I think if in doubt, just make sure that you put more of the workings in. Don't try and cut corners, because then at least you've got this sort of super set of information. So once that is done, drink a cup of coffee, take a break. We now have the sort of end milestone, which is, sorry, the milestone at the back of this one is that you documented it all. So you finished your analysis. But as with everything, it's just analysis. So next stage is to test. Now this might sound a bit like an expensive overhead. You should really be testing your systems anyway. You may well have sort of DR testing or whatever lined up where you can do some of this. One of the big challenges, I think, with these aspects is sometimes these critical processes span so many different components, maybe mainframes, maybe different areas of the organization, that sometimes the testing can be difficult. But if you think about this as the end sort of result, you want to be able to say, these are all the critical processes. We have analysed and documented all of these things. We know exactly what all the attributes are, and we have tested them to make sure that what we've documented is correct. And reality situation is you'll probably find problems. But then you'll be able to say, we identified problems with resiliency, we've now rectified them, and we've tested and they've passed. So that's really what you want to get to. So that's the end of the analysis sort of piece. You could start the report if you wanted to. The report is, I think with most sort of audits, etc., you can sort of imagine that the report is quite a lot of copy and paste, and then it's sort of putting verbiage around. This is our intent. This is the framework that we use. This process we went through. These are the people involved. You could build this up as you go along, but essentially, you've gone through that, and you now know from your spreadsheet with the components in what maybe needs to be fixed. So that's where you need to sort of do an implementation plan in terms of fixing components. So you have all the rectification. So that would be like a book of work for various different systems. May take months, year, hopefully not, but so you've got that, you've got the work that's required to basically meet resilience requirements. So the rectification for resiliency. And what I'll do is I'll sort of draw it here. I'll draw it here, this makes more sense. Then you've got test resiliency. Now, it makes sense that you test these processes as processes. You may have processes that rely on other processes, but you imagine if you've got sort of separate processes, which I'm guessing you would have, you could test them for resiliency without having to wait for the other processes to be ready. So what it does is it gives you a sort of advanced warning in terms of if anything's wrong, whether you need some more work to make the system resilient. So you can start your work on testing some of these processes anyway. The other thing as well is this is for all the stuff that needs changing, but you also want to prove the positive. So you basically want to prove all of what you've said is true. So you got the work, you got to have to test resilience. You also want to be Preparing for test. For the positive test. So that is where you said, yeah, this system is already resilient and will fail over. You want to be providing that evidence to make sure that what you've documented is correct. So again, similar sort of situation where you could have these tests where everyone thinks it's okay, everyone thinks it's going to work. You do the tests, and actually off the back of that, you have to do some more work to actually fix the positive tests. Anyway, so you've got this test sort of dependency here, where you're testing the resiliency and making sure that what's been said is right. Any of the change to the systems to make them more resilient is right, and you just feed through to the point where you're then comfortable. Resiliency points are done. We've done all the testing. We've got all the evidence. You've then got a stage where you want to complete the report. So you complete the report, and then you want to get stakeholders to sign off. So you can imagine with that, and I did miss it often in the overview of the deliverables. So the report can have critical processes. It can have all the sort of the usual verbiage, like I was saying about this is the reason why I'm doing it, this is the way that we did the work. So critical processes, different components used within those processes, the different attribution of those components, sequence diagrams showing all the different flows, and then, like I say, that's the evidence that you have done the checks to make sure that everything involved in the processes is known and is resilient. You can then have a section which shows the work that was required and completed to make the components where they weren't resilient, to make the components resilient. And then you can have a section that says, and from the testing, this is the evidence that the tests showed that we had the resilient system. At the end of that, you can take your stakeholders through it, and they should then be in a position where they can sign off this work. And that's really the end of it. That's the end of the whole exercise. Obviously, one of the things with this is that you will need to keep this up to date. So, I mean, it's almost like one of those big bridges where by the time you finish painting it, you go back to the end and start again. What I would say is I've already described this the way that we did it, and we did it once we built the platform, and it included components that we hadn't even built, so it was a very big bit of work. But I think if you can roll this into your enterprise architecture frameworks, give some sort of consideration around sort of maybe the attribution of components, ensuring that they're resilient from the first off, and also understanding whether they appear in the critical processes, then that will give you a really good head start, and it will be much more preemptive rather than reactive, because obviously the big problem with the sort of reactive nature of some of this stuff is it's very easy to get in the way of regulatory change, leading product releases, etc. So hopefully this is useful. If you do have any questions, please reach out to me. I think this is more relevant with things like Dora now, and also there are some aspects that are interesting just really with so much more use of cloud and really understanding how things work there. And I think one of the things that is probably more relevant now is making sure that we as architects make people aware that this isn't all just free. So when you have a resilient system, it will inevitably lead to more cost. Hopefully we design them properly. Hopefully we don't have resiliency issues, but there is usually a trade-off between cost of running a system and ensuring that it's resilient and meets resiliency requirements.